Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devya Matriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Brindebhyo Sarvalokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Chidharmasya Sarvadharma Surupine Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishna Yate Namaha Om Sarashiva Samarambam Shankarachara Majamam Ashmarachara Prayantam Vande Gurum Paramparam Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Gurudeva Maheshwara Gurudeva Param Brahman Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Bhadrakali Namo Nityam Saraswati Namo Namaha Veda Vedanta Vedanga Vijjastane Evacha Sri Ganesha Sharada Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om Ganeshwarye Namo Namaha. I'm also continuing after a week break, continuing our discussions, study of the Devi Gita from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, an important Shakti hymn. The primary translation we're using is the Mackenzie Brown. See Mackenzie Brown, a famous translation with a nice commentary as background information. And where are we? What happened so far? This is our eighth or ninth meeting, and ninth or 10th meeting, I think, and we're just getting to verse 23, I think. Let's see where we are, 23. So we're moving slowly through it, verse by verse, word by word, almost, idea by idea. And in one sense, a lot has happened and nothing's happened yet, right? So there's been a history of what, of course, the King Jamanjaya is speaking to Vyasa. Vyasa mentions about the appearance of the Devi. He asks that question, tell me more about the Devi. You've asked a wonderful question. It's because you must have been taught by great souled people that you asked such a question. And so the story begins that in ancient times, after Sati left her body, Shiva was in agony, and the whole world fell became inauspicious. And that inauspicious moment when Sati and Shakti had withdrawn from the world, seeming to her physical presence had withdrawn from the world, a demon came up, Tarakasura. They got a boon from Brahma that only the son of Shiva can kill him. Shiva has no son. The gods, losing their position, they go to Vishnu, who acts as guru, who tells them great information. There's no need to worry. Why are we suffering? The Devi herself, the supreme goddess Bhuvaneshwari, exists now in the Manidweep, in her jeweled island, and she's ever awake, ever attentive. We seem to be suffering only to teach us a lesson. We should go to her, and she's a loving mother. She'll answer our prayer. So and what do they do with that information? They go to her. They try to go to her. They first go into the Himalayas. The gods led by, going to the Himalayas is very important, because the main speaker, the main student of the Devi Gita is going to be Himavat, the king of the Himalaya, the Himalaya personified. So they go to the top of the Himalayas and they begin to do different practices. So that's really, in a gist, what's happened in these verses, right? And they're beginning to do various, and in 3 or 4 verses, I think 4 verses or 5 verses, the type of practices that the gods are performing are mentioned. And I think this is important because these are mentioning the types of sadhanas that get the type of response, the divine vision, the encounter with the goddess that the Devi Gita is based upon. And it happens a lot in the Devi Bhagavatam. A big theme in the Devi Bhagavatam is gods get in trouble, or somebody needs a boon or a message, or some encounter with the goddess. They do austerity, they do spiritual practice, and they have a divine encounter, right? A revelation or a encounter with the god or the goddess, who usually, it happens a lot, she appears before them, right, and answers their question, or they ask a boon, she grants the boon, and then she disappears. That's a very common thing that happens. So that's going to happen here. They're doing various sadhanas. She's going to appear. Hopefully in my next week, we'll see her appear very beautifully and stunningly, her appearance. And then they in fact ask their boon, right? Which of course is to get Shiva to have a son, that she be born again, and to marry Shiva. Shiva has a son, the son will kill Tarakasura and end the suffering of the gods. But they don't just ask that question, they ask many other questions, right? And showing that the purpose of sadhana, there's many purposes of sadhana, right? One of the purposes of sadhana is to get a boon, right? We do something, we do spiritual practices to get a result. We're in trouble, we're suffering, we need maybe divine help, right? And therefore we do spiritual practices, we follow fasts, we take vows, right? We go on pilgrimage, we do special, this is a very common thing in order to elicit a boon, a benefit, in Sanskrit they call it a varada, a boon or blessing from a god or goddess, right? We pray. So that's one reason for spiritual practice, to get, we need something. It could be very mundane, it could be very sublime and subtle, right? Or we want something. That's another thing. One thing, we do spiritual practice, we can do spiritual practice because we need something. We can also do spiritual practice because we want something, right? And we have desires, and who's going to fulfill our desires, right? So we go to God, we go to the gods in order to fulfill our desires, right? And so that's what's happened in this in the story so far. They have an emergency, a demon has taken over, they've lost it, but they need a boon. The boon is not just, oh, please kill Tarakasura. The boon, Tarakasura himself had a boon, right? So it was not easy to kill. Please be born, oh goddess, please be born so that you can marry Shiva to have a son that would kill Tarakasura, right? So to be born is not just kill Tarakasura. Be born and kill Tarakasura. I think there's showing that there's the encounter with calling forth divine reality. The goddess is not just for a temporary audience to get a boon. You're getting a temporary audience to get her to come permanently, to be born, right? To incarnate, right? So that's already showing some depth to the question, what they're asking for. So that's what we need and what we want, right? But it's not just that, right? There's other reasons to do spiritual practice. Some people do spiritual practice to get liberation, right? Or to get they have this desire to know divinity, right? To have jnana, Brahma Gyan, to know God, or to know divinity, or to attain samadhi, some yogic state. We have many ideals that are presented in spiritual life to get liberation from the cycle of birth and death, right? Or to live forever, because we love, if we love the goddess, we want to live with the goddess, to have communion with her. So some people do spiritual practices for the boon. What's the boon? That I may live with her. I can be with her at all times. I can live in her heaven world, in the language of the Puranas, right? Right. Or even more extreme, to be one with her, to have the distinction between me and her, or to be almost non-existent, or maybe completely non-existent. So these are various reasons for spiritual practice, and these are the different reasons that the gods are practicing, right? And we'll see some of the practices that they're doing. We mentioned last week about this Devi Yajna, which is a verse we read last. We only did one verse last time, and then we mentioned that the Devi Yajna is mentioned in the third book of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it describes the types of yajna, the sacrifice to the goddess as per the modes of nature, the gunas, sattvic puja, rajasic puja, tamasic puja, and then it says a mental puja, an antaryajna, mental manasa yajna, where the purpose of that, this mental worship, is to attain jivamukti, to become liberated in this life, right? So we'll see the fact that they practice. First of the sadhanas mentioned is Devi Yajna, right? We'll see in a few verses the mental worship. Some of them are going to perform mental worship, not just physical worship. So some of the gods may have higher ideals of liberation or union or unity of experience, not just ending of their suffering and the return of their kingdom and stuff and their power, right? So we can see like that. I'm remembering. God, what was that book? A little book I read in high school, Hare Krishna book. Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. I don't know if you've seen this book. I think it's what it's called. I haven't seen the book in 30 something years, right? It's a small book called Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, and it includes it primarily deals with conversation with a Peace Corps worker in India and Srila Prabhupada, the founder and the guru of the Hare Krishna movement. And they're having a nice conversation, and it was a good enough conversation that it made it into a book. That was a very popular book when I was a kid. One of the books that they would sell or give away, in their book distribution. Peace Corps worker eventually became he's a famous writer within the Hare Krishna movement on scientific, religious stuff, an interesting personality. But anyways, in it, I remember an argument that really hit me as idealistic, 16, 17-year-old boy, right? I remember he's the Peace Corps worker said, but some people are praying to God for money, right? And you can see, like, well, that's bad, that's wrong, right? And Srila Prabhupada said, no, that's not wrong, it's not bad. Prayer is always good. That line really hit me, right? He says, at least they know the source of all wealth is Krishna, right? And at least they know from where Krishna, that God is the source of everything, and to fulfill their desires, even if they're selfish desires and self-interested desires, at least they know it comes from Krishna. He says prayer is good, and by praying to Krishna for money, by praying to Krishna, their heart will be purified, right? And then they'll pray to Krishna for Krishna, right? I remember that line was really strong, it really hit me, because I was super judgmental of all the hypocrites in the spirit, we get in that mode of seeing everyone's faults in spiritual life, especially when we start out young, and when we're young and idealistic and immature. Those three, young and idealistic, are awesome. Immature part causes trouble, right? So at least, but anyways, I remember this point that prayer is always good, and they'll become purified, right? And by the purification, their heart becomes purified, and spiritual desires begin to awaken, less selfish desires begin to awaken. So let's see what our gods do and how this falls into place. I'm going to share the screen here. That has come. Yeah. Okay. You can see that. Somebody wave. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. This is the verse the verses we talked last time. He came to the Vishnu, Lakshmi, and all the gods came to the rocky crag of the Himalayas, Lord of mountains, and all the gods commenced the preliminary acts of worship. Remember, it's Purusharana. We have a long discussion on Purusharana, this purification way of awakening mantras, right? And then last week or 2 weeks ago, they all performed the Amba Yajna, the mother's sacrifice, right? Knowing well her ceremonial rites, right? All the gods hastened to perform her ritual observances, including the third day rites, O king. So we spent the whole time on this verse last time. What is the Amba Yajna, and some of my descriptions of different the rites of different days and different places, right? So we'll start on verse 20, and then I read all these verses from the third canto. So we're on verse 23 now. Let's see, let me find my notes here. Okay. Kecit-samādhi-niṣnātāḥ, kecin-nāma-parāyaṇāḥ, kecit-sūkta-parāḥ, kecin-nāma-pārāyaṇot-sukāḥ. So you'll see one word there in the next 2-3 verses. You're going to see a couple words repeated a lot. One is kecit, that Kecit, kecit, and that means some people. Some, who are the some? That refers to our topic here is the gods, right? Some of the gods. So not all the gods were doing the same thing. It wasn't a group meditation or a yoga class, right? They're all doing different things, right? Each one was doing sadhanas appropriate to their nature, to their training, to their initiations, and also matching what they're trying to accomplish. Because not all the gods are in it for the same purpose. Some, of course, collectively, they're trying to get the goddess to appear, to give a boon to be born, marry Shiva, have Kartikeya, and Kartikeya kill Tarakasura, right? But the fact that they're doing different sadhanas, and some of the sadhanas mentioned are very different from each other, right? Although they're related, shows that they're some are doing this, some are doing this. Kinchit, some do this, and then when you say kinchit, when you repeat the word kecin, not kinchit, kecit, when you say some, and when you repeat it, and some others. So kecit, and so here in this verse, it's used 4 times, right? So the first time, some do this, while others do this, and others do this, and still others do this. It's kind of the way that word is spread, right? So we'll see what they're doing. And then there's another term you see at the end of the first line, the first half of the line, parāyaṇāḥ, where it has a short a, parāyaṇāḥ, right? Parāyaṇāḥ. That means that's going to mean with great attention, right? And then the last word or joint word of the last line, parāyaṇāḥ, with a long a, you'll see that has a different meaning. So it's also plain in the next 2-3 verses that parāya and parāya is going to be, it's playing on the sound and the meaning of the two. We'll see we'll go back to that, see how it works. So what were some of the gods doing? What the kecit doing? Samādhi-niṣnātāḥ. Niṣnātāḥ. Some were, he translated, Mackenzie Brown translated as absorbed in meditation, right? That's his translation or glossing of the term samadhi, right? They were practicing samadhi, or were they in samadhi, right? So he's translating samadhi as meditation. Of course, we know samadhi in the Patanjali system, samadhi is not identical to meditation. It's a couple steps beyond meditation, right? It's the final step after meditation, actually, right? In the Ashtanga system. And the Devi Gita itself will mention the Ashtanga system. And the Devi Bhagavatam also has knowledge of those type of listing. There's different types of listing. And the Devi Gita has a slightly different list. The yamas and niyamas are slightly different, right? But the basic structure is the same. So when you hear samadhi, it's not just that they're meditating. I'm not trying to disagree with the translator, but I think it's that they were in high states of meditation, right? We all try to meditate, right? But usually, most of the time, our attempts at meditation are just attempts at meditation. And they're definitely, I can't say definitely not, but they're usually not, for most people, for me at least, are not samadhi, right? So the shows that some of them, maybe not all of them are in samadhi, not all of them immediately set for meditation and went into samadhi, right? Attain the goal of meditation is unitive experience of the goal of meditation as in the yogic system, right? But some did, right? Also showing there's different sadhanas according to the different temperaments and abilities and levels of advancement of the devotees, of the gods. Some were absorbed in meditation. Niṣnātāḥ means fixed, devoted, skilled, right? Learned. It has a lot of these type of meanings, right? But mostly he describes it as absorbed, right? So we have a similar term like nishta, like ishta being fixed into our ideal. It has that same type of idea, that nishta idea, right? In the previous verse about the Devi Yajna, it says, knowing well her ceremonial rites. They knew how to do this. The practices were not beginners. Their practices, they already knew how to do these practices and they knew the rituals. So similarly, the gods that are in this type of meditation, they're expert enough, right, to easily become absorbed in meditation, in samadhi. And then what is it? It says, kecit-samādhi-niṣnātāḥ, kecin-nāma-parāyaṇāḥ. Others, that second kecin means others, kecin, are focused. Parāyaṇāḥ here, it was a short a, long a, the para, right? Here means focused, right? Was attention. They're focused on what? On nama, on the name. So these people are, some of the gods are meditating on her names or on divine names. So this is two types of sadhana. They're not the same sadhana. Maybe we can think, oh, that somebody say, oh, like you'll see some, maybe if you've seen this in some writings, it's not popular in Western writings on yoga and the like, but it's some Indian writers, like Swami Shivananda is an example of this, who's writing for an Indian audience, but in English, right? He'll use the term japa and meditation. They use this term japa and meditation. We usually think that, oh, japa is a type of meditation, right? You know, it's like japa is defined as mantra meditation, right? So that's how we use a term like that, right? But here it's japa is one thing, a type of meditation or focus or repetition or on the holy name or a mantra. And meditation, usually when you say japa and meditation refers to visualizing the deity within the heart. Very often that's the use. So I think this could be justified in this this verse also. Some were by meditating on the image of the deity, visualizing it, and become so absorbed that they go into a samadhi experience. And some others were involved in japa or different types of meditation on the name. So before we move to the second half of the line, let's work on these. Let's look at these two first a little bit more. Samadhi. So I know, looking at who's on our call today, we know all of you are practitioners of yoga and have studied and are familiar with the Patanjali system of Ashtanga yoga. And the Devi Gita, as I mentioned, has a similar background and shares this version of Ashtanga yoga with other similarly a similar category of text. Different Puranas, certain tantras will have the similar list, right? So the eightfold system is not unique to Patanjali, right? Patanjali is an early. Be careful, because we're speaking beyond our knowledge of what happened in the ancient world, but Patanjali, it seems to be somebody who organized and systematized already practices of meditation that were in the meditative yogic tradition, right? Since that time, especially after Patanjali, but also through the yogic system independent of Patanjali, similar practices were already being organized. And Patanjali, we sometimes refer to this system of yoga as like Raja Yoga, a method of mental control and of concentration, right? In the world of mental control and meditation, concentration, samadhi makes sense, right? And so if you think of, we have yama, niyama, and asana, and pranayama, and then we have pratyahara. Then finally, the last three states are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, right? So what are they doing? So dharana is to focus on a single point. What's the object of meditation? The object, it's interesting, in Patanjali system, the object almost doesn't matter. It's a state of meditation that you get to by concentrating, right? In the devotional schools, in the tantric schools, the object is important. What you have samyama with, what you unite with in samadhi, which is what it will have a different effect, right? So it's not just meditation, it's on what you meditate, not just concentration, on what you concentrate on. So they're obviously meditating on her, right? Some are meditating on her name. In this verse, they're probably meditating on her form or her essential nature, perhaps, right? So they're fully absorbed meditation. The object, that means dharana is to focus and concentrate on what? The object of concentration, the technical term is pratyaya. Pratyaya is the object, we call it the object of meditation, pratyaya. And dhyana, meditation, is when your concentration becomes more steady, more consistent. Sometimes described as like pouring oil from one cup to another. We have what are the other examples? Colorful examples, or image, a candle in a windless place, that becomes very fixed, right? And what happens then is that the distinction between the object of meditation and the meditator and the act of meditation becomes lessened, in dhyana, in meditation, right? And then a little bit technical, but then that this distinction, at least experientially, right, as a mental state, disappears in samadhi, where the distinction between the object and the person meditating, the subject and the object, disappear, and there's a experience of this unitive experience. That's generally, in very general senses, what we mean by samadhi, right? Then you get into different types of samadhi, and samadhi with seed and without seed, and with form, without, you can get very technical. The Devi Bhagavatam, the Devi Gita doesn't get that technical, so I don't want to insert Patanjali's distinct flavor into a text that doesn't have that. The general idea that it's absorbed, the distinction that in meditation, that's why I chose this particular picture to go along with it, is a yogi or a god in meditation, where the distinction between the object and the subject, the meditator and the object of meditation, the point of meditation, here the goddess disappears. So they have an experiential union. Then others are meditating on her name. That's the second part of this first half. Parayana, with our focus on her name. So they're focusing. Another way we could say that in English, we'd say meditating on her name, right? Another use, right? We use the word meditation a little differently sometimes. So how do you meditate on the name? Of course, the name is very special, in the devotional tradition especially. And the Devi Bhagavatam has a lot of the flavor of the Vaishnava focus on nama as a way of a preferred way of sadhana is often singing or meditating or repeating the divine name or divine names, right? In different ways, right? And the name in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, the Tantric tradition, both, they say is that Nam and Nami. This is the two terms, Nam and Nami. Nama means name, Nami means named, right? So the Nam and Nami are one. Normally, in the way language works, please don't, I'm trying not, I'm telling myself how language works. I have to explain to adults how language works. That's foolish, right? But I use how this understand, what's meant by Nami Nami is that words, especially names, not just words in general, but names specifically, names point to something, right? Name nominates something. It indicates something, right? So the name of something points to the thing named. It's a sign. It's a pointer. It's not the thing named, right? If I can name this, I can give this cup a name, cup, right? So the word cup, I can't drink out of the word cup. I can drink out of the cup to which I've described it with a name. I can also name the cup George, my cup, right? Like even more intimate. I can have a nice relationship with it, right? But it's the name shows a type of intimacy, right? But it's still not identical. I'm going to drink out of George here in a second. Right. So so what the text say, what the saints say, the devotional saints say, as well as the Tantric mantra shastra says, in mantra, or with dealing with the divine names, right, and divine words, even divine mantras, but names especially, the nam and nami are identical. The name and the thing named are one. So to imagine saying the word cup and now you have a cup, right? So that's not true for cups, but it is true. It can be true perhaps for God or for Ma. You say God's name, you have God in some sense, right? And maybe it's hard to understand that sense, right? But we have faith that this is true, and then we have experience as we practice that the name is non-different from the name. That means that God's name is non-different from God. That means that the goddess's name is non-different from the goddess, right? So if that's true, that's an amazing detail, right? Right. It's not a normal word. It seems like a normal word, right? And I think we may have in previous discussions talked a little bit about how, to name something describes what you know of it, as well as what you don't know of it, right? It captures it. the name of something, even symbolically, captures everything you know about the object or the thing named or the person named, and everything you don't know about the person named is indicated by the name. Rather, if you're thinking of the qualities, you may miss, you have limited qualities, limited knowledge of the qualities, and you're going to miss out a lot and maybe make mistakes if you simply rotate the qualities of the thing meditated upon. But if you say the name, it means all that. It means all the everything you know and everything you don't know. It's very complete. So our Guruji, Swami Bhajanananda Saraswati of Allahabad, Prayag, he would say very often that if you sow a thought, he described everything for meditation in spiritual life. The act of sowing and reaping is like sowing a seed, you reap a fruit, right? Right. So you sow a thought, you reap. His guru told him this, and it turns out it's in this little saying is something you learn in elementary school in India. It's like a dictum you learn, right? But Guruji learned it from his guru, probably learned it at school, right? But it's still a profoundly spiritual message. If you sow a thought, you reap a deed, right? You plant a thought, right? You reap an action, right? Because thought becomes action. All action, not all thought becomes action, but all action starts with thought, right? So you sow thought, it reaps an action. You sow an action, you reap a habit, because action repeated becomes habitual, right? You sow a habit, you reap a character, right? Your sum total of your habits become your character. They'll lead to your character, obviously, right? And then you sow a character, you reap a destiny. This is the saying, right? So this was a major teaching of my Guruji, and I think about this all the time because he said it so many times and wrote it in letters, you know. So it is something we have to think about. And then I remember I can still hear his voice. Therefore, right, thought is all important, right? Thought becomes all important. If you want a spiritual destiny, enlightenment, liberation, freedom, union with the goddess, whatever the highest of a residence in the highest abode of her heaven world, whatever the spiritual goal is, right? We want a spiritual destiny. We need a spiritual character. Our spiritual character is done by spiritual habits. Our spiritual habits are formed by spiritual actions, and spiritual actions are informed or created by spiritual thinking. Therefore, he said, thought is all important. And then he said, think only divine thoughts. Right. Of course, it's not easy. Gurus like to speak in absolutes. Think only divine thoughts, right? I'll be a little more gentle. Try to think of some divine thoughts. Without thinking divine thoughts, it's not going to work, right? Of course, it may require only divine thoughts, right? That may be the goal. The gods here, I mean, one of them sits down and goes into samadhi. At least some sit down and go into samadhi. They know how to do this, right? They know how to, they have, maybe they're only thinking one thought, the divine thought. Right, but we fill our minds. So what is that thought? You have to, the thought, if God is the higher thought, the goddess is the divine reality is the higher thought. That's a great definition by Saint Anthelm. The God is the being which no greater being can be conceived, the highest possible being, the highest possible reality is God or goddess, right? Plant that. You have to plant God thought to get God action, to get God character, God habits, God character, God destiny, or divine habits, thoughts, actions, habits, character, destiny. So you have to plant it in seed form. And back to our thing that God's name is a great seed, because a seed, as a seed contains a tree in potential form, right? So God's name contains the full God in potential form. Right. So another line, Swami Shivananda writes it, and it's also in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's in many devotional texts. I think it maybe, I have to double check, but I think it's even in the Devi Gita someplace. I remember whenever I see it, I underline it mentally, because there's a verse that comes, you see this like that. It says something like Sarva Shakti, all powers are in God's name. Right. So there's unlimited, all divine powers are in God's name. Right. So you plant this seed, you get a very divine. Oh no, unless you plant this seed, you're not going to, I mean, if you don't plant corn seed, you're not going to get corn, right? You know, so you have to plant God in seed form to have a divine harvest. So this is a motivation and an explanation of the power of meditation on God's name as a seed, right? focusing on her name. So there's different ways of focusing on the divine name as per sadhana and devotional tantric yogic traditions. So one is kirtan, the singing, and especially they call it nama kirtan. There's different types of kirtan. Kirtan means singing, right? Sankirtan means singing together, group singing. And so we usually know, because of the success of like, for instance, the Hare Krishna movement in the West that has spread kirtan, and then and then after that, Swami Shivananda also taught kirtan, and his group, his disciples brought it, and also disciples Nimkuli Baba like Krishnadas and Jai Vital, and they're also spreading this Nam Kirtan. And Nam Kirtan is really easy. Nothing's easy, but it's relatively easy because it's primarily it's the singing of the name. There's other types of kirtan. There's Leela Kirtan, right? Leela Kirtan is very powerful, but it requires learning a foreign language, unless you're going to do it in English, right? That's one of the reasons, like in the Chaitanya tradition, the Gaudiya tradition, Nama Kirtan, Guna Kirtan, and Leela Kirtan. These are simultaneously, it's as important with each other, right? You sing songs about God's glories. You sing songs about different leelas, different pastimes of Krishna Leela, for instance, of stories of Krishna and Radha and the gopis. Sri Ramakrishna, the whole section of the Katamritas are describing Leela Kirtan, whereas professional singers would sing in a particular way and then improvise. You'd have a composed song, and then they improvise lines from it, and then Sri Ramakrishna would improvise lines and go into ecstasy, just meditating, rotating the divine actions of the stories of God's incarnation, right? Or God's qualities, Guna Kirtan. But both of these require, certain sense, learning Hindi, Sanskrit, Bengali, Gujarati, right? And so Nama Kirtan is easy to do, right? And you don't need to learn, you need to learn a few words to know a few names, right? So you sing God's name. I'm going to, in our Google Classroom tonight, I'll post an article I mentioned, I think, a couple weeks ago, on Kirtan, and it was originally transcript. When I gave Devi Gita classes 20 years ago, whenever it was, 15, 20 something years ago, when I got to this verse, I spent 3 hours talking about Kirtan, right? Because this is a favorite topic of mine. So that was transcribed and edited and then published in Namarupa and a few other magazines. It's in the Return to the Source book if you have that, but it's also on the Cyberduni. I'll put a link to the Cyberduni, because that's a part. So I'm not going to go into the full description of Kirtan because it's already available. I'm full of. I'm gonna just said I'm making noise with my beads and stuff. I'll try not to. I get nervous and play with things with my hands and beads and things like that. So Kirtan is chanting of God's name is very important. Singing of God's name, right? Other forms of mantra focus on nama is japa. That's probably, and that's likely what this may be describing. Japa is the meditative repetition of the name as a mental practice. It can be done out loud. It can be done, that's Vaikari. It can be done whisper, and it can be done manasika, which is done mentally, right? And that's like example, like Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. This type of repetition, meditation, repeating internally as an object of making the sound and the meaning of the name, usually a name or a mantra, the object of your meditation. That is japa, right? There's also just that's nama. There's nama kirtan, nama japa, and there's nama smarana. Smarana means simply remember, to remember the name. And this can be done at any time. You can walk around and just think of the name. The name can be in your mind. Right. It doesn't require, like japa, even nama japa has some yam niyama, has some restrictions. Often, like, you'll get initiated into a name or a mantra, and you'll be given the rules of how to chant the mantra. For instance, when it should be done, after bathing, wearing certain types of clothes, which direction you face, what type of mala you use, which fingers you use to chant the mala, how many malas you need to do in one sitting. If you don't do the mala, you can count on your fingers. What's the pattern of, I mean, there's all these rules, right? Maybe some dietary rules the Guru gives you, or some restriction rules during sadhanas like this. But Nam Smarana is, you can remember God's name at any time. When you're walking, when you're dreaming, when you're sleeping, you can go to sleep thinking God's name, you can go to work thinking God's name, right? And for that, generally, generally texts say there's no restriction, right? It can be done anywhere, because remembering God is always auspicious, right? Certain types of sadhana as japa require some restriction, because they're consciously performed sadhanas that have been handed down traditionally. But Nam Smarana has also been handed down traditionally, just remember God's name, right? Then there's dhyana, nama dhyana, meditating on God's name, right? And this may be also what they're doing. It's unclear what the verse says, where it becomes not just japa is repetition, but when the repetition becomes so deep, just like if the object of meditation is the mantra or the name, then samadhi can happen to that too. Dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, where now the distinction between the object, the name, right, and the one named, the deity, and the one repeating or meditating on the name disappear in a unitive type of experience. So there's dhyana of the name, right? There's also parayana, which we'll get to in the next verse, and next verse says that. We'll leave that one aside, right? My first line is parayana, and it's parayana, right? And that is a different type of recitation we'll get to, right? Krishna Chaitra mentioned that he got some good advice from a sadhu about, and I said, I shall add that to my list, right? Called Lakita japa. This is the different type of japa where the name is written down repetitively. We have a special note in the Swami Shivananda's Japa Yoga book. He'll give instruction in Lakita japa. It's a very powerful sadhana, right? There's no real restrictions for it. You can try it and see how it suits you. I think it's very, very powerful. I've had off and on experimented with Lakita japa in my spiritual life, where you have a special notebook and a special pen, and you simply write the mantra, either in good handwriting, either in transliteration form, or if you learn Devanagari or the original language, that you can write it in the form, as long as you know what you're writing. It shouldn't just be a picture. You shouldn't sound out the letters mentally as you're writing, or you can write it in English or your own language, right? And you write it carefully and neatly with care and attention, also following some yam niyama. One shouldn't move around too much. One should sit comfortably. One shouldn't stop the Lakit japa until a certain amount is like a pages, or until the end of the page or something like this, right? There's different rules like this. But it's interesting because it connects the mind, it connects your motor skills, and writing and saying are different. They're a different part of the brain. It does something different, right? Seeing and writing and doing it. And also the effect, the pages of the mantra, the pages of the name are considered very holy, right? And therefore the book itself, the books later, the filled notebook should be kept very carefully, either under your shrine, or they can be burned in a holy fire, or put into an ocean and a body of water like this. There's you see what's the power of God's name written down. We all know the story of Hanuman and the monkeys building the bridge to Lanka, right? Hanuman just jumped, right? But the monkeys wrote the name of Ram on not bricks. I want to say bricks, because that's how I would build a bridge right now, on stones. And it said the stones floated because of the holy name of Ram, just the power of God's name, right? That's the idea of it. There is many of you know one of the great of the modern age, one of the great teachers of Nam Smarana, Nam Japa, Nam Kirtan, was a Karelian saint named Swami Ramdas, Papa Ramdas, right? He has he has many books, but he wrote a 3-volume autobiography. The first volume is the most charming. If you want to read it, it's probably available online, I think it's called In Quest of God. I'm pretty sure, right? And you see somebody, he left home as a monk, wandering monk in his old age, right? And completely dependent on God's will and God's mercy, God's grace, and completely immersed and meditating on one particular mantra, Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. This is the mantra. His father gave him this mantra. His father became his guru when he taught him this mantra. And as a result, Swami Ramdas has spread this mantra like nobody else in the modern world. So I went to his ashram in Kerala many years ago. Swami Ambikananda and myself went. And all day long, you can imagine everyone's constantly chanting Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. They're doing japa. All day long, there's kirtan, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram. I mean, 24 hours a day, it's always playing, right? But then they took we had a friend that was staying there. He didn't have the key for the bank, because the banks have special keys, right? But he took me to see the bank through the window. And the bank was this large hall with metal cabinets, each one locked, right? Along of almiras, metal almiras, these Indian metal closets. He says they're all full of millions of sheets of Sri Ram Jai Ram, where devotees have written the mantra and then sent it to them, and they keep it in the bank, right? So that you can imagine how much power and holiness and concentration is in hundreds of millions of mantra repetitions kept there, right? And the reason they call it the bank is that this is that. So my original connection with Swami Ramdas, I discovered his books very young, but then I also discovered his grandson, right? His grandson, the grandson of Swami Ramdas, as per Purvashram, before he took sannyas, he was married and had a son. He was married, had a daughter. That daughter had a son. That son's name is Premanand. And Premanand used to live in San Diego. And Premanand was a married man also. He had a son, wife and a son, and grandson. But Premananda was also a saint. His grandfather was a saint. Premanand was a householder saint, right? Also completely devoted to God's name. And there's a story, he's now expired. He passed away some years ago, moved back to India and passed away. But he got cancer many years back. And a serious case of cancer that, and medicines at that time, even now, are not that good. He had a terminal state of cancer. And so he wrote to the successor, Swami Ramdas, his grandfather's successor, named Mother Krishnabai. His main successor was a lady saint named Mother Krishnabai, who said, "Do not worry, I'm lending you like so many billions of Ramnams. The punya, the benefit of those japa will go to cure your cancer, right? Will overwhelm whatever karma." And in fact, he was cured, right? Whatever that meant, what in her mind, how she could transfer the effect of millions of mantras. I don't know how that works, but this is what the story was told to me, right? He says, but you'll have to pay it back with interest, like any bank, right? It says you and your group, right? Meaning his satsang group. He had a group that's met for 60 years in San Diego, right? That you're chanting continuously and growing together of Sri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, and your disciples or friends and well-wishers will also have to we'll do japa and count how many, and you'll have to do so many japas and count how many you do, and send me a count. You don't have to write it out, but you have to count how many you've done, right? To offset like this, But it's interesting that the writing of the mantra was considered so potent that it could be stored, right? And I've been to some temples in Hadwar. There's a temple, a Hanuman Temple, where the walls are books that have been plastered, books of the disciples Ramnam, right? There's a temple there's a Hanuman Temple near between Rishikesh and Hadwar, right? Dedicated to Nimkali Baba, and beautiful temple, beautiful big Hanuman, really beautiful ashram. But I was told also that when the temple is being built, the disciples were of Ninkrali Baba and Siddhi Ma, like the Devat and the second generation devotees, were doing like each japa of Ram Ram, just Ram 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 Ram, right? And then those sheets of paper were being mixed into the concrete mixer with the water and concrete, and most like paper mache stuff. And so literally the buildings being cemented together with the Ram Nam Lakit Japa of the disciples, right? And then every brick, of course, had the word Ram painted on all the sides. So they really was built by the sadhana of the devotee. So that Lakit Japa is another way of meditating. And I'm not saying that they probably just not mention that they Lakit Japa, but I just wanted to mention different ways that Nama-Parāyaṇāḥ, a way to be absorbed or focused on the name, could be done. Second half of the line, kecit-sūkta-parāḥ, kecin-nāma-parāyaṇot-sukāḥ. Let's see if I can see a little better here. So kecit, others, some are in samadhi, some others are focused on the name, kirtan, japa, something like this, right? Meditation, right? And now it says, and still others, kecit, sūkta-parāḥ, our parāḥ again focus on the sukta means hymns, right? So sukta means some are focused on hymns, right? Nilakanta, the commentator, the one person who's the ancient world's commentator or the medieval world's commentator on the text, right, mentioned that this refers to the Devi Shuktam. And in our other course, we just finished the Hindu goddess course, in the first module, I gave a translation and of the word-for-word translation of the Devi Shuktam, a Vedic hymn to the goddess, or by the goddess, spoken from the goddess's own perspective, as well as some recordings you could hear recited beautifully. This Vedic hymn from the this is from the 10th book of the Veda, chapter 22 is where the Devi Shuktam comes in the Rig Veda, right? So, and there's places where the Devi herself says, I love it when Devi Shuktam is recited. Other places it says like that. So this hymn is recited. What's the purpose of recitation? Purpose of recitation is to please the goddess. She likes to hear this hymn recited, right? Of course, the hymn has meaning, right? So the hymn, the meaning, meditating on the meaning is also profound. But so actually, this is an interesting thing. Actually, we'll talk more about this in other verses in the next section after Ma appears and the gods recite hymns, special mantras to her from Chandi and other Vedic mantras and Chandi mantras, Devi Mahatmya mantras to her, right? We'll give the technical stuff for that next when we get to it. But there's different ways to consider the potency of hymns or of texts. Some is the meaning of the text. Some is the sound of the text, right? The power of the sounds or the meanings of the words. In the Devi Gita, generally, because it's a Gita, there's teaching. Most traditions have it where it's not the recitation of Devi Gita is not so important. It's the study and practice and following and contemplation of the meaning of Devi Gita. But there are, like the Chandi, the Devi Mahatmyam, the recitation has almost become more important than its meaning. People know the meaning. I've given lectures on it. Many people have talked and given commentaries on the meaning, right? But the recitation of the text itself, that gets its power, it's considered to have power in the recitation itself. In Mackenzie Brown's, in the white version of the book, he gives an interesting, at the beginning, it says, Navasloki Devi Gita, right? On page 41 of this, right? And it's like 9 verses from the Devi Gita, right? And there is a similar hymn or collection of verses called the Saptasloki Durga Saptasloki, right? Where it's not 7 verses from the Chandi are considered so powerful. You don't have to chant the 700 verses. Just chant these 7 verses, and they have so much. There's meaning in it, but there's sonic power in reciting it, right? And it's an ancient tradition of reciting the Saptasloki, right? In attempt the Navasloki Devi Gita is not as ancient, right? It seems to have been added or developed by people who wanted a similar group of verses that they could chant to that would have the power of reciting the full text, right? So it's interesting. So in his the other version of which I think we give a PDF of this book without the commentary, he leaves that out. He didn't include it there with some reason that it's not a very ancient practice, right? But there's an attempt at the power of recitation. The words themselves have power, right? But the words have meaning. So like I tend towards texts like this. To me, the meaning is very important, right? If you go to, also, Devi Sūkta is a Vedic hymn, right? If it refers to the Devi Sūkta, it's a Vedic hymn. So maybe here some are reciting Vedic hymns. If Sukta means any hymn, like verses from the Chandi or other texts, right? Then it could refer to any, just reciting a verse of texts, of hymns from texts, or it could be specifically referring to Vedic hymns, right? And so if you look at Vedic schools, even now in ancient world and even now, there are many schools, right, where very often priests are being trained, right? Brahminical schools, right? Usually young boys are sent to such school, young Brahmin boys sent to these schools. It takes many years, very difficult Sanskrit, very difficult memorization. It's years and years of memorization of text, right? And they get hired later to recite the text, right? There are classes in those schools on the meanings of text and the commentaries of the text, but that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is the proper recitation of the text, because the proper recitation does something. It doesn't just mean something, it does something. And you can see, if I say Om Namah Shivaya, that means something. It means I bow. I mean, actually, Namah Shivaya, Namaha, not me, Shiva, right? To Shiva, not me. That's what Namah Shivaya means, right? That has a meaning. It's a way, and what the Shiva means, Shiva has a meaning. It means the auspicious, the good, the beneficent, right? And Om has a meaning. So there's a meaning to that mantra. So the mantra has a meaning. I also use the mantra to do something that's to focus my mind on Shiva. That's almost independent of the meaning. I use it to focus my mind, right? And it may do something. The chanting of Namah Shivaya we believe it has an effect on the body, on the mind, on the environment, right? Where the Chandi is chanted, where the Navasloki is chanted, the environment changes. And then there'll be Pulsuti, where this mantra is chanted, ghosts disappear, inauspicious effects of planets are nullified, right? Karmas are destroyed, right? Kings are pacified, right? There's texts that describe one who recites this text, broken friendships will be restored, right? So it's like, it has nothing to do with nowhere in the text to talk about, oh, you who restore broken friendships, right? It's like you who killed Chanda and Munda. And now, but the benefit of it protects you in time of war, wards off ill effects of planets, and repairs friendships, right? These are the false tuti of the Ajastotam, for instance, right? Even I think the Chandi even describes it at the end. I think the last verse describes something like that, the last chapter. So meditating upon, concentrated on her hymns can mean all that, right? And then Kecin, still others, what do? They Nama, again, name. They're doing something with a name. Before it was Parayana, here is Parayana, right? Utsukkaha. So Parayana, Utsukkaha, there is Parayaṇot-sukāḥ, because of the Sandhi, but the two words is Parayana and then Utsukkaha. Utsukkaha means they're eager. They're eager to do something with eagerness. They long to do it. They have full intent, right? It's a beautiful word. The full attention with their passion and interest in what? In nama, name, but now parayana. So parayana means recitation of something, recitation or reading of a full text, right? It has the meaning of like from beginning to end. That's a parayana, right? So it's used. You may hear. I mean, once you explain it, you'll be able to use it this way, and you'll hear it. You'll hear people use it this way. I need to do my Chandi Parayana, right? So Chandi Parayana means I have to read. Every day I read a chapter from Chandi, or on Saturday, on Friday we do Lita Sahasrana Parayana. We recite the whole Lita Sahasranama, right? Now you see it's plain Parayana and Parayana with concentration and from beginning to end. So it's playing poetically and by rhyme and aesthetically. The two words look very nice. Parayana was focus and attention. Parayana from beginning to end, right? So when you chant a name, Parayana from beginning to end, this most likely refers to like a Sahasranama. That's how I understand this, because there's not many. You don't do a name from beginning. You don't study and read. I have to do my Parayana, Ram, Ram, Ram. Your Parayana is, like Hanuman. You read the Sundarkan from Ramayana. That's a very common Sundarkan Parayana. You recite the Sundarkan. You recite the Gita. You recite the Chandi, Devi Mahatmyam. You recite Lita Sahasranama, Vishnu Sahasranama, Shiva Sahasranama, Kali Sahasranama. So they're another way of meditating on names, right? Some gods were fully absorbed in meditation, others focused on her name, some concentrated on her hymn, while others were intent on reciting her names from beginning to end. Let's see what I have here. So it's a good place to end. 8 o'clock, a little after 8. About Sahasranamas, these are practices that are very popular and very beloved. Sahasranamas, these lists of 1,000 hymn names, right? And there's also lists of 300 names. There's a Lalita Tisati, right? 300 names of Lalita. There's 100 or 108 name hymns of most deities, right? And a very common thing in Tantra, in Tantric Diksha, in classical Tantric Diksha, will often be, not always, but you'll get a mantra, a mula mantra for recitation or meditation. You'll get a Sahasranama, 1,000 names of the god or goddess that you've been initiated into the worship of. You'll get a stava, a hymn that describes some special hymn connected to the deity. You'll get a kavacha, a hymn of protection, a shield of protection, right? You'll get a hridaya, another category of hymn where that's the most famous in mainstream Hinduism is called the I forgot what it's called, Aditya Hridaya, right? That's that Lord Ram himself during the middle of the battle in Lanka, he was losing, right? And so I believe Surya himself appeared, or somebody appeared to him and initiated him to a text or into a mantra called the Aditya Hridaya to worship the sun, and he got special weapons with this mantra and was able to continue the battle properly. So that's a lot of people chant that even if they're not initiated into a Ram tradition or Surya tradition. That's become like part of mainstream devotional Hinduism of the Parayana. People do Parayana of these hymns also. So so Sahasranama, the 1,000 named or 108 named, 100 name, 108 name, 300 name, or 1,000 named hymn is usually part of tantric practice. One gets a mantra, will also get usually a Sahasranama. There's so many famous Sahasranamas. The most famous is probably Vishnu Sahasranama, right? The Devi Gita itself reveals many. The Devi Bhagavatam, I believe this refers to Sahasranama. This Nama-Parāyaṇāḥ refers to Sahasranama because the Devi Bhagavatam is full of Sahasranamas. There's a Gayatri Sahasranama in it, for instance. I think if I haven't looked at the big text, 80,000 verses, all the different chapters, right? But I remember there's several, at least 3 or 4 Sahasranamas in the I believe in the Devi Bhagavatam itself. So that means it comes from the Devi Bhagavatam, which is a Purana. Most of the Sahasranamas are found in Puranas, right? Or in Itihasas. Like for instance, Shiva Sahasranama comes in there's 3 or 4 popular Shiva Sahasranama. The most popular one comes in Mahabharata, right? Or where King grandfather Bhishma teaches Arjuna the Shiva Sahasranama on his deathbed of arrows, right? So in the Devi tradition, become very popular is the Lita Sahasranama, right? And there's some beautiful commentaries and are a little bit accessible now. There's classical commentaries and some that are inaccessible but very profound, and a few more contemporary commentaries that make it very easy to meditate upon these names, right? And there's a problem with Lita Sahasranama. Just tell you a little bit of history, is that the text itself says, it comes from the Brahmana Purana, right? It says that not everybody's qualified to chant Lita Sahasranama, that only those who are initiated into Sri Vidya can chant Lita Sahasranama. And so we've asked, and some of our friends have asked even higher up on the guru lineage line of people who would initiate people into that thing, that a lot of people chant Lita Sahasranama as a parayana, as a devotional parayana. Are they doing some sin by doing so, by disobeying the very scripture that the text appears in? He says, well, in modern times, it seems that the Devi had another plan, right? Otherwise, because it's become so popular, even against scriptural injunction, right? And it's done very purely and very sincerely, usually, that maybe it's the Divine Mother, her own adjustment to the modern age, where things that used to be highly restricted are less restricted. Other aspects of Sri Vidya tradition are still very restrictive and secretive, but Sahasranama, the secret's out on the Lita Sahasranama. Before the pandemic started, we were giving classes on the Kali Sahasranama, right? Giving classes on the 1,000 names of Kali. There's several Kali Sahasranamas also, but the one of my favorites there, I was giving on those. So they're an important category of text. I remember one of our tantric guides, pundits and gurus, he made a comment. He says he was teaching us many mantras, right? Vedic mantras and tantric mantras, right? And he says many mantras are good. One mantra is better. I still remember that line, right? Many mantras are good. One mantra is better. Many names are good. One name is better, right? But so it should not, they don't replace the power of Nam Japa or Nam Kirtan or Nam Smarana, right? But they have their own benefit for sure. By chanting these collections, each name it's the same deity, it's the same one that we're saying when we say a mantra. Like I'm being careful because it's tradition not to recite certain mantras out loud. Even Om Namah Shivaya, the Vedic mantra, should be chanted out loud, but we all know this one, so I'm using that as an example. Even like when you say Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. But when you chant Shiva Sahasranama, each name is only about that Shiva, right? And it adds, it informs, it nourishes your understanding of Shiva. And what happens, that if you do this regularly, if you chant the Sahasranama regularly, right, and different days, different names will jump out at you, or some meanings like, oh, I chant all 1,000 every day or twice a day, but today this one jumped out, right? And it's as requiring more contemplation or being meaningful to what I'm going through, or another aspect. I never really put my mind to the aspect of the goddess or the aspect of sadhana, aspect of like that. So it has all kinds of things like this. And one of the ways I approach Sahasranamas, and when I give my classes on the Kali Sahasranama, is that we are, what is the term? The term I use is we're naming the mystery, right? We're giving a name, or we're finding names, or names have been get revealed by saints, the sages, to the one that's unknown and unknowable. She's unknown, unknowable, but she's also known and knowable through her names, right? And so it's not like, oh, since we know this name, now we know what God's like. Or now I have this 1,000 name, so now I know authoritatively the nature of Lalita or the nature of Kali, right? Each name is a partial meditation, a revelation of some aspect of the infinite. And Sahasranama means 1,000, but it means unlimited, because there are thousands of 1,000 named hymns, right? That means there's unlimited names and qualities, revelations of the deity, right? And usually what happens, they're shared. Many names are shared. In the Kali Sahasranama, there are many names that you find are referred to Lalita. In the Lalita Sahasranama, there are many names that refer to Parvati. In the Parvati Sahasranama, there are many names that refer to Lakshmi. In the Lakshmi Sahasranama, many names, it's like it's the idea. This is definitely the idea of the Mahadevi. We've talked about in our Hindu goddess course, right? How the different goddesses, and then you have this idea of the Mahadevi. They're all aspects of one. The Sahasranamas fully embrace and manifest the Mahadevi ideal. We're all gods. They're not different, not 1,000 goddesses. And sometimes many of the names are described, like if I give a Kali Sahasranama, okay, she who holds a sword, that refers. She who holds a severed head. She who has a garland of skulls. She who sticks her tongue out. She who is black. She who stands on Shiva. But then that's okay. It's like, but she who sits in the Sri Yantra, she who is the mother of Ganesha, she who is the lover of Krishna, right? So now it's like, it's not just names pointed towards Kali, it's now names pointed at other goddesses that are identified with Kali, or identified with Lalita, or identified with Radha or as Gayatri, right? Whatever the deity is, right? So this is definitely Mahadevi theology of the great goddess. All gods and goddesses are ultimate aspects of the god or goddess, and in the Sahasranam, it's our god or goddess. It's Bhuvaneshwari or Lalita, like this. So I think it is now 8:15. So I think this is we got one verse and we're slowing down. I thought we'd go. I was really thinking we'd do 3 verses, but we didn't do 3 verses. So we'll end with this. We'll recite this verse again. Some gods were fully absorbed in meditation and samadhi. Others were focused on her name. I'm playing with the beads again. Some concentrated on her hymns, while others were intent upon reciting her names. But parayana here means reciting her list of names, or the full from beginning to end, from the full list. So thank you for your kind attention. Sri Guru Maharaji ki jai, Mahamaya ki jai, Swamiji Maharaji ki jai, Ma Bhuvaneshwari Devi ki jai, Ma Dakshineshwari Bhavatarini, Dakshina Kali ki jai. I shall, let's see here. Stop share and Jai Ma Jai Ma. Are there any questions or comments in today's verse? Krishna Chaitra, tell me.
Thank you so much, Guruji, for bringing up Akita Chapa. It saved me an email to you. Yeah, and so I'm definitely going to practice that. And thanks to, again, you instructed us when we need to set a task, what is good for us, for spiritual life. So I had a question regarding how to optimize our japa in terms of the bhakti and the motion and devotion versus the speed of, I got to finish these amount of rounds, and it's getting late, you have to go to sleep. Sometimes I get myself in anxiety. It's like, all right, I got to finish, and so I know that's probably not the optimal thing to do.
Yeah.
And I was kind of learning about one of the last classes in the Hindu goddess. We were discussing the Gayatri and the meter of the Gayatri mantra, and it kind of made me realize that there's a particular rhythm and a pattern that creates a natural flow for the chanting of it. And for chanting japa, sometimes it's like, all right, just trying to go fast beyond what's my natural capabilities. Sometimes just trying to keep up with others. I feel like I'm the slower one, the fat chubby kid in PE class, falling behind the rest of them. So I'm trying to go a little bit faster, but it's a struggle, and it gets me creates more anxiety than anything. So just trying to find the rhythm that finds that balance of chanting enough mantras, but infuse it with enough devotion, not getting stressed out about it,
No, it's interesting. There's something about numerical strength, right, of committing to a number, right? Because that's one of the benefits of, I was playing with beads and making noise, and now I can't find my beads. What happened then? I live in a world of drop of beads here. Okay. Something, the benefit of a mala, of course, right, is that Swami Shivananda describes it as a whip to control the mind. That's what his definition of the japa mala is, a whip to control the mind. And because if you ask yourself, if you do without a mala, and you can do, there's other ways to do japa, we don't use a mala, you don't count. You can give yourself that might be better if you're causing, if the number is causing you anxiety, right? Rather than quality, rather than quantity is becoming more important than quality, and even getting in the way of quality. Sometimes it may be good to switch it up a little bit, right? The Gita japa slows you way down. It's not about speed, right? So writing the mantra is a slow way of doing japa, right? But very powerful, right? But you can do it by Swami Shivananda says by watch or by clock. You know, it's like I also sit from 6 to 6:30, or from 6 to 7, or for 1 hour, or whatever it is, right? And then if your mind goes fast and the mantra goes fast, that's okay. If your mind slows down, the mantra goes slow, that's okay, right? Then it's a period of time, right? That's one way of doing it. But the problem with that sometimes, that's why I said the japa mala is a whip to control the mind, is that we can ask ourselves, oh mind, did you meditate, did you chant, did you do japa for the full time? And your mind will look you right in the face and go, yes, of course I did, my dear Bhajanananda Swami, right? The mind's a liar, trying to save faith, right? The mala is like a metronome. It doesn't lie, you know, it's like, you know how many you did, you know. I remember as a struggling musician in my youth, right, when we're learning, you know, I had a metronome, and I used to get so upset that the metronome kept speeding up, or, you know, right? It's like it broke. It's like it didn't speed up. I was slowing down or speeding up. I was off, right? The metronome is doing it just right, right? So it cannot mess up, right? So the mala like that, or the number has some benefit like that. So we would just suggest to people, I mean, everybody has different instructions and different tradition and guidance, but as a general rule, and our gurus taught us this way also, as a general rule, is that you start with something you can do regularly, right? And then it's good to do that, and if you can do more, that's okay, right? But not to do less, right? And then over time to increase the number, right? And not do less, right? But still have a number that you won't go underneath of. Like some tradition, I know your parent tradition, there's a irreducible number that's given. That's a pretty high number, right? It takes several hours of the day, right? And therefore the tradition, I have to be careful what I say, but sometimes it's the desire to go because you have such a large number of japa, and yeah, that's a daily practice, not an occasional practice. So like a Buddhist Chadana or something, you go very fast, right? You know, speed is important because otherwise your whole day, if you do 1 mantra with each breath, it could be 10 hours before you finish your required amount. So you have to go very fast, right? And there are certain mantras naturally when the mind goes fast. But generally, when the mind focuses, it slows down, right? So really fast is the opposite of meditation in a certain sense, right? In a certain, although a spinning top looks like it's not moving, right? So also there is a speed also has its place, right? But I think you have to think how to honor our required number, if there's a required number, without, I mean, being in painful anxiety and never letting it go deep, right? The thing is, when you're rushing and anxiety are both things that happen on the surface level of consciousness. Actually, this is something that happens, and this is principles of Raja Yoga analysis of the mind, states of meditation. Fast thoughts are surface thoughts, right? When you're angry, your mind is out of control, right? And it's really fast, right? People say, "Oh, take a deep breath." Your breath slows down, your mind slows down, and you go deeper rather on the surface of agitated surface level of consciousness. So speed and agitation are surface level of consciousness things, right? And so if we make that a habit of being at the surface level of consciousness, then we're not getting, I can't say we're not, there's always benefit, but we're not getting the full juice of letting it go deeper and deeper and deeper. And sometimes that means letting it slow down or speed up, or there's all kinds of practices, but sometimes that's a matter of that may be why Swami Shankaranandaji Maharaj told you to do Lakita Japa. He may have told you the perfect thing to slow you down, right? Do the fast things you're doing, whatever you need to do, right? But to do something that's in spite of it or with that, it's going to go slow and intentional, right? It's a very and concentrated. Right? Because also after years of something, we can also do things out of habit. That's an unhabit. Also habit. Thank God for habit. We want to do japa and habits, right? But it should be with we should be habitually concentrated, and habitually, anyways, I don't know, that helps a little bit, but we can discuss privately a little bit more if you'd like.
Thank you so much.
Jayama.
Good. Jayama.
Anybody else? Making noise with my beads again.
Well, Guruji.
Yes, tell me, Swamiji.
One thing, when you were talking about Nam and Nami, I was reminded of the metaphor, the analogy we heard some years ago about when he said it looks like a thought, but it's not a thought.
Oh, yes.
And how the door and the wall.
Yeah, I think, that's a great, let me see if I get it. I have to put it, I have to have the analogy in my head to work. This is, I think, Nirmalaji Maharaj told us this originally.
Yes.
He says that like if you don't know, if you've been in a house for the first time and you don't know how, like, let's say you live outside, you run to a house for the first time and you see the wall and you clack on the wall, you see the wall, and then there's a door, but as far as it's just a design of the wall, right? A door and a window look like a wall if you don't know that you can walk through it, right? It looks like you have a painting. You can have a painting and you can have a door that you can think, oh, that's another painting that's on the wall. It's solid, right? And so it's not obvious that you could walk through it, right? And doors and windows they're liminal creatures, right? They're both wall and not wall. A door and a door. They're both inside and outside. They have both these qualities, right? And so you don't realize that you could walk through it if you don't understand its nature. So a mantra or a holy name looks like a thought, right? But it's not a thought, right? It looks like a thought. It's the infinite appearing like a thought. That's called a window or a door, right? Right? Is a space looking like a wall is called a door, right? But it's not a door. It is a door, but it's not a wall. You can walk through it. You can't walk through a wall. Most people can't walk through a wall, but you can't walk through a door. So it's a thought that goes beyond thought. It's not a thought. So I remember that Swamiji, he wrote in a small booklet one time. He gave me, though it says God's name and God's form is not a name or form. It's God. Right. So it's an interesting thing is that God's absolute, God's name, absolute, God's form. So it's true. Name and form, nama-rupa, limit. That's its nature. That's why I think, behold, God, the ultimate realization of God or conception of God, as per certain schools of Vedanta, has to be beyond name and form, because name and form, by definition, is a limit. And if you're limiting the very thing that by definition is unlimited, of course, the definition is limiting, but you get the point, the larger point, right? Therefore, God has to be beyond name and form. That's fine. Think God's name, but God's name and form are not name and form. They're not limited. They're the unlimited, appearing from our side as a thought, as a name, as a form, right? So it's the nam and nami, literally, it is something different. And that's actually one of the definition of mantra, manatrayatiti mantraha, that a mantra is that thing or that sound which repeated liberates thought, right? Liberates the mind, right? Thought is a product of the mind, but it's a thought that's beyond thought, that goes beyond thought. So that's an interesting. That's a very. I think about this a lot. That the name and form is like a door, or a window. It's tricky because we think, oh, maybe we can think, oh, it's just a name though, right? Or it's just a form, right? And thinking, oh, that's just part of the wall. We're not realizing that it's a part of the wall that's the infinite, right? That's both wall and the infinite. It's our access to the infinite. Right. I told the story, I don't know if in this series or many other times I've told the story, and it's attributed to all kinds of saints, right? And I usually told the story as a Neem Karoli Baba story, but I'm convinced now that the earliest version of the story I've been able to find was on Tapovan Maharaj in the Himalayas and Swami Chinmayananda in his young age. But who knows where the story originally comes from, where the guru tells people meditate on the name of Ram or the name of Krishna or the name of Kali or Devi, right? And the disciple or the student says, but isn't that limiting God? Isn't that limiting the absolute? And sometimes I think like this, like even though we think, well, God's infinite, now I'm supposed to think of him as holding a bow or a sword or a flute or having a girlfriend or a pet monkey or something like this. It's like it seems limiting. Right. Or just why I choose one over others. That's another thing we do. Like, well, if I think of Ram, well, but I also love Krishna. Well, that's that. Without that, now I'm not thinking of Shiva, and you get confused again, right? That even when you choose something proper and you have faith in it, we still get confused that we're limiting the unlimited and we're limiting ourselves. Maybe I made the wrong choice or something like that, or I'm leaving so much out, right? And so, as per the story, the saint or the guru changes the topic and keeps talking to other people, and then in the middle of the conversation asks that disciple who brought up the point, "Please bring me some water or some tea. I like my tea here, right?" And so the boy goes and gets a glass of water and brings him his water, and then the guru says, "What is this? I asked for water." So I brought you water. No, I didn't ask for a cup. I wanted water, right? And so that's the point, that the cup is a limit water. I guess cup by definition holds water, it limits it, right? And by putting water in this cup, is that different? Am I not separating myself from water in other places or water in other shapes? Yeah, but the only way to get water is in a cup, practically, right? So the cup reveals water, not limits it. Right. So that's the thing, is that the name and form of God, or these mantras and these divine images and texts, they don't limit the divine, they reveal the divine. Even though by nature seemingly limited, it's an aspect, like the Hasanama, she who holds a sword, she who sticks her tongue out, she who has long flowing hair, right? That's a very distinct shape, that's a very distinct cup, right? But obviously we don't mean that she only has a sword and nothing else. And she only has long hair, and that's it. And now we've defined God, and now we don't need to do anything else. And those who say anything of a different, those who think God's a different hairstyle are going to hell or something, right? That's become silly, right? We don't think that. We shouldn't think that. It'd be silly to think that, right? Right. So God's names and forms reveal the infinite, not limit the infinite. Of course, sometimes our thoughts about the infinite limit the infinite. So that's also true, right? I'm trying to stretch it here. So, how do you?
It also reminds me of Ramakrishna's story of the man who wanted to cross the ocean and walk across. And so King Vibhishana, without showing him, it wrote Ram's name in the corner of on a little piece of paper, and then tied it in the corner of his cloth. And said, "Now go walk across the ocean. But watch out, because if the minute you lose faith, then you will drown." So the man, not knowing what's tied to his cloth, starts walking across, gets halfway across, and this is amazing. I wonder what's written. What did Guruji write on my cloth? Or what did he do? And so he opens it up and he goes, "What? just the name of Ram, and then he drowned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The term just the name of Ram. Right. That's the thing. It's not a limited thing. It's not a small thing. It's an all-powerful thing. Even not knowing it, that shows the power of the thing. Even not knowing what it means, it has power. And actually, this is we can bring this up also. The Holy Mother, I think about this a lot because I struggle, and we all struggle in our sadhana means struggle, right? A disciple of Holy Mother Sharada Devi came back to who was initiated by her into a mantra. Says, Ma, it's not working. Your mantra is not working. Says, how is it not working? I still, after years of practice, or maybe probably not years of practice, probably days of practice. We're all impatient and immature like this, right? Right. I still don't get concentration. Right. It says the purpose of the mantra isn't to concentrate. Right. That's not the fruit of the mantra. Right. It's great when we have concentration in our japa. It makes it so much more pleasant. But it's not the purpose of the mantra is not to learn to concentrate without distraction. Although we should try to say the mantra without distraction, right? She says, you don't know what it's doing. I know what it's doing. It's doing it. Just say the mantra, right? And let it do what it does, right? Don't worry on whether or not you're concentrating. What a judgment on whether a mantra is true or not, or whether the Holy Mother is a real guru to give the real mantra to liberate us because we're not getting good concentration, as if that's the nature of the thing. Is the nature of the mind is, I mean, the definition, I mean, there's Sanskrit slokas to justify this, is that which accepts and rejects, right? The mind isn't concentrated. It's not its nature. If we can get it concentrated, yogis try to learn to train the mind. It's great. Like how wonderful a trained dog is. Right, but trained dog is still a dog. It will still bark and chase a squirrel, and you may not have full control over it. How dangerous an untrained horse is, right? But a trained horse is so wonderful. But a horse is still a dangerous creature. You never know when it's going to get spooked and when it's going to kick you, like this. So the mind is like that. That's not the standard, right? Trained mind is great, but the mantra isn't just is not just to learn to concentrate. It's doing other things. Right? We don't know what it's doing. Even physically, it's doing things, right? We don't. I mean, I'll tell you, different texts will say, like, was every repetition of the mantra, unlimited powers are released, right? With every repetition of mantras, millions of years of karmas are being destroyed, right? All kinds of things like that. There's a Chaitanya chart. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, has him saying, to say the word Krishna, 2 syllables, the 2 syllables Krish and Na, is so powerful that it destroys more sins than are possible to commit, right? Yet we say Krishna, 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 nothing seems to be happening. Well, then he actually has, maybe we have to say it properly. There's the Nāma-parāyaṇāḥ, the offenses we didn't get into, right? On mistakes that happen, and everything has its, you can mess anything up, even simple things, right? Even saying God's name, we can mess up with the wrong attitude and bad habits, right? But we don't know what it's doing. We believe the mantra is doing something. And he quotes actually from the Padma Purana. Let me see, I remember sometime I have, it's verses in my mental Rolodex somewhere. It's Nitya Shuddha Mukta. The holy name is always liberated. It's always eternal. It's always pure. It's always liberated. Something like that. Nitya Shuddha, something like that, right? It's like, it's doing something, right? Only God knows what she's doing through her holy mantras and names. Okay, anything else? Very good. I'm glad you brought those up. Some of these are great.
Elijah has a question.
Elijah G.
I think it's more of a comment on 2 different things. One of them was talking about sort of just like limiting God in general, and it's sort of an example. I think of this just thinking about all of the things Sri Ramakrishna has talked about, and just keeping in mind like how he would often compare God to being like the ocean, right? And how in that ocean there's all these different forms that come up. At sometimes there's bubbles, and sometimes there's waves, and sometimes there's really big waves. But also at certain parts of the ocean too, it freezes and it takes on form,
Yeah.
right? And it takes on forms and different shapes at different times, and sometimes it's not big forms and sort of this sort of thing. So like similarly, like God can at times, if she wills, take on a name and a form and
Yeah.
allow herself to be seen by us. And as
Yeah.
many texts have said, like just by our devotion, she does that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing that I thought of. And then another thing is this verse from the Kalika Ashtakam, if I could read it real quick.
Yeah. Please.
Surapanamatta subhakta nurakta lasatputa chitte sadavir bhavete japa dhyana puja shuradanta panga svarupam tvareyam navindanti deva. You are intoxicated by divine elixir and pleased by your sincere devotee. You are ever present in the pure and luminous mind. As japa, meditation, and worship, you make the impure pure. What your true nature is, even the gods do not understand.
I love this line. As japa, you make the
As japa.
Japa, meditation, and what's the three? It's been a while.
Japa, meditation, and worship.
And worship.
So
You make
japa, dhyana, puja.
Yeah, and puja. You make the impure pure. Right. That's what's happening. Right. That's one of the things. I mean, there's many things, but this is an important part of it, especially in the beginning levels of sadhana, that the impure mind, I mentioned that our sannyas guru, Swami Bhajanananda Maharaj, always say that the only purpose of sadhana is mana shuddhi, purification of the mind. Right. My mind here be mind, body, and heart, And in the next few verses, they're going to talk about different types of austerities. And I have already in my notes a quote from the Rig Veda that without purifying the body and mind, the goal of yoga cannot be attained. The goal of spiritual life cannot be attained. We'll get to those verses when we get there. But I was excited to talk about these things. And I was foolishly thinking I'll get to 3 verses today. But yeah, very beautiful. Thank you for sharing. These are great.
That's all that verse reminds me. I think of this particular verse, probably my favorite song on Ram Priyadas's Trevor Hall's new album is the song My God. And the repeated refrain is falling to the calling that is my God. And it has that double meaning, but I like that meaning that the calling itself, that is God.
Yeah.
That calling out, that puja, that japa, that worship, that is the form that God takes. It'd be very beautiful.
Excellent. Om. Anybody else?
Daima.
So there it is. We did good. Wonderful. We're wishing everyone a happy weekend. And of course, so many inconceivable problems and heartbreaking problems all over the world. Right. But in our little part of the world also, there was just 8 minutes away from us. It was at church shooting in Laguna Woods. We passed by that church, all the time. Beautiful little building. We've always dreamed about it would be beautiful to have a Kali Mandir there, The building looks like a Sri Yantra. It's a beautiful building. Has a beautiful vibration, very, very sad for our community and just digesting when such horrible things happen they're happening all over the world. That unfortunately we're getting a little bit comfortable with horrible things happening all over the world, and even things like what happened in our neighborhood this week, a couple of days, day before yesterday. It's sad that we're comfortable with that too, right? Things become so common. But anyways, we're praying for those who have passed and those who have been injured, and just the trauma and scar that it leaves on the country and the people. Anyways, what to do? Well, we one of the things is like the Swami Ramdas's grandson inherited got some mantra from the bank, right? This is something we're taught that we can do for those who are suffering and to repair certain very profound psychic breaches, right? By chanting mantras we pray, this is good. And sometimes people criticize that we pray and not do, right? Obviously, we need to do as well as pray, right? But chanting japa for in a situation like this is praying and doing both. We have some. It has we have belief that it has some effect and some experience also. And it also gives us something to hold on to during times of extreme agitation, and heartbreak. All right, Jai Ma, Jai Ma. Good night, everyone. All blessings. Hari Om, Hari Om. Alrighty. Calendar review. Edie was there. Shelley. Daima.
Guruji, I'm going to be sending you an email soon. Some
Okay.
very, very exciting news.
Okay, I shall wait.
So yeah, I'll send you an email like the next day. So
Okay. Daima,
Jai
we're
Ma.
waiting. Can I Krishna Chitra? Daima.